Today we have Kathy Berkidge with us. So she has joined us from Australia. And with that, I'll hand it over to Kathy. So yeah, over to you, Kathy.
Thank you so very much. Hi everyone, it's wonderful to see you all here. I wish we were in person. I certainly was just talking about the last time I travelled I was in India, and I've been to Agile India in person the last time it ran, but of course we've been online for a few years. So welcome to my session, my workshop on the Stakeholder Engagement Canvas. So without further ado, let's get started. Once again, do feel free to change your view to show me small and maybe the screen big or whatever makes sense to you. So the first thing I wanted to start off by talking about is Agile and what Agile is all about. It's not about sprints, it's not about Jira, it's not about stories. It's about collaboration. And when we think about collaboration, we're talking about collaboration inside the team, but that team's collaborating with people outside the team. And in fact, for successful Agile adoption and successful Agile projects, we know that the most crucial step is that engagement, that buy-in, participation and support that we want from our stakeholders. And of course, team members. But most importantly, when we think of stakeholders, we're thinking of perhaps if you're an Agile team member, you might be thinking about your product owners and those subject matter experts. If you're a Scrum Master, you're engaging the team, but you might be engaging all sorts of other departments in your organizations. No matter what part of an Agile team you play, you're working with the team, but you're also working with many stakeholders outside the team. They're going to be providing you with all sorts of input, advice, requirements, clarifications. So we need to ensure that we work with these people effectively. So over my more than 20 years working with Agile, I started looking at some of the tools and techniques and what does stakeholder engagement really mean. And the more I investigated, the more I thought that, yes, there's a few really good ideas out there, but then I think there needs to be more. And that's what got me started. So the first thing I investigated was the concept of what does stakeholder engagement mean? Not just within Agile, but in many project definitions. So good old Wikipedia, I thought that would be a great way to start. And you can see the definition there is stated as stakeholder engagement is the process by which an organisation involves people who may be affected by the decisions or can influence the implementation of those decisions. So I thought this sentence was rather interesting. It's a process. Stakeholder engagement is a process. And I thought to myself, is it a process? Is it step one, step two? Can we do a process mapping chart, a flow chart of the engagement process? And I thought, well, no, you can't do a process. It's not a step-by-step kind of activity. Stakeholder engagement is an ongoing task, an ongoing way of working in any team. So we don't stop the process. When we think of processes, they have a stop and a start and a number of steps. And I thought, I'm not sure that stakeholder engagement is an actual set process, but certainly it's a continuous activity. So then I looked at further and I said, the process by which an organisation involves people. I thought to myself, the word involves people. What does involve mean? I thought, well, when we're working with our stakeholders, it's more than we're just involving them. We want them to support us. We want them to be willing to share their information. We want them to be willing to participate in the various Agile ceremonies as needed, Most importantly, we want them to feel comfortable that they can tell us their requirements or their concerns, or in fact share information without feeling that they should be holding something back because there's some sort of fear. So that when I thought about this, I thought, well, stakeholder engagement is not just involving people, like putting them on the sidelines and letting them watch. I mean, that's involving someone. We're letting them watch. We don't want people just to be on the sidelines like on a cricket match watching on. We want them to be part of the game. We want them to be fully happy to be part of the game. We really want them to participate, not just be involved. So as I started investigating this stakeholder engagement, I thought, there's got to be more to it. There's got to be more to it. And that's the background towards why or how my stakeholder engagement canvas came to being, because I wanted to explore it in a little bit more depth than what we had. So let's start off with the first thing I'd like to talk about are what are the common challenges. So when we think about your role and your work doing stakeholder engagement, what are the typical challenges you and your teams face with stakeholder engagement? So as I said, this is a workshop. So I'd like to invite you all to go to that Jamboard, the link I put into the chat, and I'll put it in there just one more time in case you've missed it. In the chat window, there's a link to a Jamboard. Now that Jamboard, when you go into it, you will see that I've created a bit of a space where we can brainstorm. If you haven't used Jamboard before, it's a very, very simple tool. On the left-hand side is a basic menu, and the menu allows you with the first icon to write or draw on the canvas. You can erase it, which is the next tool. You've got a pointer, but the tool at the fourth tool is a sticky note tool. When you click on that sticky note tool, you'll see it opens a window and you can enter text to brainstorm and enter a sticky note with your responses. So what we're going to do for this very first activity is I'm going to subdivide you into 3 groups, and I'm going to ask my host to jump in here. Priyanka, if you could please create 3 breakout rooms and perhaps let people know, maybe in alphabetical order, which people are in which group, because I've created this Jamboard, and at the very top of the Jamboard, you'll see a little window with arrows left and right. Because we're going to subdivide into various groups, Group 1 will look at page 1. If you use the arrow across, Group 2 will look at the second one, and Group 3 will look at the third one. So at the very top, you've got the arrows, and you can move different pages of the Jamboard, which is the link I've given you. So Priyanka, I hope I've pronounced that correctly. If you could please create 3 groups and 3 breakouts and let people know which group they're in, which room they're in. If you could please let them know, that'd be great.
Sure. Yes, so I have created 3 breakout rooms, and we have around 18 participants in each of the breakout rooms. Okay. So do you want me to just maybe call out the names? I don't see any option of copy pasting.
Yeah, I think there's no other option. So please, everybody, listen up to know which room you are in, because which room you are in will indicate which slide you're going to work on. But I'm sure when you get into the breakout rooms, you will figure it out together. So if you just want to call out the names quickly, and please just make a note of which group you're in. And then when we go into the breakout rooms, I'll ask you to go to the Jamboard page corresponding with your group number. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'll just quickly call out the names. So in room 1, we have Abhijit Singh, Amit Kulkarni, Amol Jain, Anita Kumari, Anuragini Mishra, Chandan, Chetan Arora, Dhananjay Patil, Jacinth Paul, Kathy, obviously, Meghna Pethe, Payal Basu, Priya Malhotra, Ravi, Shrikant, Sudarshan Sharma, Swati, and Yogish. So these people we have in room 1. In room 2, we have Ashwat Narayana, Franklina, Girish Hegde, Girish Patil, Meenal, Rajat Talwar, Rajesh Panchal, Rajiv, Ramnath Kashikar, Rathi Devi Kuri, Rubin Gill, Santosh Srinivas, Sonal Agarwal, Shri Harsha Shriram, Srinath Ramakrishnan, Subodip, Sujata, and Uma Shankar. So these people are in room 2. And then the last one, room 3, we have Abhishek Mahajan, Archana, Atulya, Jaya Chakravarti, Jayashri Ramchandran, Karan, Krishna Puranik, Mukesh Kumar, Prashant, Pravas Chaudhary, Preeti Karthik, Rashmi Priya, Sai Sapre, Sudipta, and Suresh. So these
Wonderful.
People, yeah. And just a note for participants, if you all still have any, concerns, or if you all have not, heard the room properly, you can just ping in the chat here. I can, just again re-ping in which room you all are. So I'm just,
that's
open
fine.
The breakout rooms, right, Kathy?
Thank you. And just in one moment, so you'll see everybody in your breakout room, you'll only see each other. So your task is to, I'm sorry if you can't get the link, I can't help you any further. I'm so sorry. It's just click the link and you'll go into the breakout. I'm so sorry. Sometimes there's issues. So your job is to look at which room, which slide number, and for you to brainstorm and discuss together what are the common challenges to stakeholder engagement that you and your team face. So I'm going to give you just 5 minutes to brainstorm as many ideas using your Jamboard and the sticky notes of all the challenges that you typically face with stakeholder engagement. Please open the breakout rooms, and please, we'll bring you back in 5 minutes. Enjoy, and I'll be watching in the background. I'm in a very lucky position. I can see what the breakout room people are saying and doing, and there's some wonderful responses which I will share with you when the breakout rooms end in just a few minutes' time. So everybody here in the main session, the breakout groups, everybody who's been brainstorming in those groups are going to come back, and we're going to have a look very briefly at some of the responses they came up with as to what are the challenges to stakeholder engagement. You still have time if you want to enter your thoughts about what are the challenges with stakeholder engagement. You still can have entered them into the chat, and I'll be able to read them out if you've got any thoughts you'd like to share. It's wonderful to see so many people. Wonderful to have you all together and back. So let's have a look at what the groups came up with. I'm going to share with you the work that each group did. Group 1, look at all the ideas they had on stakeholder engagement challenges. Over-demanding stakeholders, traditional mindset, job fear, resistance to change, distant stakeholders, lack of trust, don't have buy-in, cultural differences, they don't understand how they can contribute, lack of commitment. These are very common ones. Wonderful. Group 1, some awesome ideas there. Group 2, some similar, some different. Fear of change, fear of contradicting the right stakeholder, pressures to meet deadlines, accuracy, lack of availability. One of the most common. People are so busy and they're resistant to share. They have conflicts in their priorities. And also group 3, lack of openness, lack of transparency, that resistance, power politics, Power politics, isn't that terrible? We all work in the same company for the same reason, but there's some sort of power struggles happening. Lack of trust, lack of time, lack of focus, lack of platform, over demanding. They don't want to collaborate. So you can see that each of the three groups had many wonderful and slightly different ideas about why stakeholders resist or we have difficulties in engaging them. Great job, everyone. Thank you for putting in all your ideas. So let's go back to our canvas. Now, we know that traditionally, depending on where you've come from or what project you've learnt from or what methods you've used, there are some existing reasonably good tools and techniques that can help us with stakeholder engagement. So the RACI, or the RACI matrix, where we look at each stakeholder and we look at all the tasks that we need and we figure out who is responsible, who is accountable, who contributes, and who is informed. And we create a matrix of which task involve which stakeholders in which way. A wonderful tool, a helpful tool, but does this help us get stakeholder engagement? Do we get their support? Do we reduce the issues? No, but it's an important tool so we can understand which stakeholders are involved in what way, sure. Then we've got our old friend, the Menlo matrix, the power interest matrix, where we categorise our stakeholders as those with a lot of influence on the vertical scale, those that are a lot of interest or affected, we scale them on the horizontal, and depending on where they sit in each of the four quadrants, we can start thinking about how we might approach our stakeholder engagement. We can prioritise, we can have an idea of how we should engage each of these categories. But we're basically trying to pigeonhole all the stakeholders into one of four categories. This is a useful tool. But once again, I ask myself, does this help me engage stakeholders? And I thought, well, it's important, just like the RACI matrix, they're both important tools. They give me a lot of information about some ideas about who's doing what and what kind of perhaps ideas of the types of level of engagement I might need to consider. But do either of these help me engage? And then another tool that some of you might be familiar with, it's not the most common tool used these days, it's the old onion diagram. We identify various stakeholder groups and we analyse their involvement in terms of how close they are to the solution delivery. At the centre, the closest people, the solution delivery team, and at the outer ring, just like an onion, they're external to the change. Of course, remembering most of our work, we're implementing change. Something is changing. That's why we're doing the work. So these three stakeholder engagement tools and techniques, apart from spreadsheets with communication plans, I couldn't really find too many other full great stakeholder engagement tools. And whilst all of these three tools are helpful, I don't know whether they're quite enough. This is what my motivation was when I was talking to my colleagues, my peers, and my classes and clients about stakeholder engagement, that with these tools we use in projects all the time, but they still don't tell me how to engage my stakeholder. So when we think of stakeholder engagement, how do you engage your stakeholders successfully? So using that chat window, so please go up into the menu and open your chat window, and everybody and anybody, as many thoughts as you can into the chat window. What are the techniques or tips that you use to make sure that you engage your stakeholders successfully. So please don't use the chat in the volume, use the chat window to type in your response. Please go ahead and enter as many thoughts as you can. How do you engage your stakeholders successfully? Cadence and synchronizations, inviting them in meetings which are required to give them connection, creating rapport, fantastic, creating open space, aligning them to their connections, interactive workshops and awareness sessions, setting up cadence, backlog grooming sessions, one-to-one meetings, building rapport. I'm just reading out everything in the chat there. Transparency. Satush, you said the big word, transparency with stakeholder. Empathetic. And I'm terrible with names, so Sudasham, being empathetic and understand where they come from. Absolutely. Involving them in the Scrum of Scrums, role expectation matrices, setting up clear expectations. Absolutely. Periodic reviews and meetings. Priya, ask for their help. Absolutely. Ask them for their help. Planning and retrospectives, building relationships. Payal, building relationships to grow trust and grab that connections. Aligning with their vision. What an important one there. Thank you for sharing. Increment planning. Looping them in important emails, asking for their feedback and exception with open heart. Abhishek, I love that open-heartedness. Conduct value stream mapping, absolutely. So there's many sessions and meeting types we can bring them in and sort of garner their information and elicit their details so we can help understand. Involving them with the problem solving, read the personality of each stakeholder and set the approach. Garish, I 100% agree with you. That for me is what inspired me with the tool that we're going to talk about next. Sharing examples of the one team culture. Thank you, Sujatha. That's fantastic. Ruben, meeting them in person at least once in 6 months. Oh, I wish we could. I'd love to be in India. My stakeholders are mostly over there. I haven't been able to come for 2 years. I miss you, India. Anyway, sorry about that. I love coming to India. I've been many times and I have so many friends and colleagues there. I miss you all. Mind mapping, absolutely. Understand their culture. That's an important one too because we are all different. We come from very many different cultural backgrounds, countries of the world, regions of the country, ethnicities, all that. Abhishek also entered being not so technical that they can't understand because it's like we're talking a different language if we're using all our jargon. Fantastic. Speak their language if you can. I can't speak any. I can speak English and I don't know much Hindi. I wish I have to learn more. It must be me, but I'd love to speak more languages if I could. I respect you people in India that know at least English and at least 1 or 2 or 3 other Indian dialects. I'm very, very in awe of you all. Making them aware of the real picture, demos, meet informally, outside the box, inclusive conversations. Parlez-vous français? Thank you, Shaitan. Being realistic with them instead of being optimistic. You know, Ruben, that's an important one. Being transparent and honest means being realistic rather than just saying what they want to hear. That's an important one. Empathy, empathize. Sharma, absolutely. So you've covered nearly everything on my list. You can see I've just flicked the slide over into a few thoughts that I came up with some of my teams. When we did this exercise, these were some of the important ones, and many of them you have already covered. But for me, stakeholder engagement includes planning, involving them early and often, the WIFM, what's in it for me, WIIFM, finding out what's in it for them, what's in this piece of work that's going to benefit them, giving them ownership, communication, recognition and acknowledgement that our stakeholders have their own problems, their own requirements, and their own expertise. And we should recognise and acknowledge that, yes, you do have that, rather than being very dismissive when they raise something. Many of you have said transparency and flexibility and purpose, that relationship building, trust and rapport. And one that I didn't see flick up in the chat window was about listening. Listening is one of the most important skills in stakeholder engagement, because if your stakeholders feel that when they speak and raise their concerns or their requirements or their doubt, that if we can show that we're listening, that will help them engage with us, because people know if you're listening or not, because it's reflected in our actions often, or the way that we are responding to them. So listening can be super important as well. So there's some principles there, but you've all created so many other principles as well. So thank you all for helping and seeking feedback, one of the most important. That's what Agile is about. And I just wanted to bring up a little point, Megana, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I'm sorry if I haven't. If we're seeking feedback, we need to listen. If we ask for feedback and then we dismiss it or act like we're not interested, what was the point? People feel even more distrust to us if we say, what do you think? And it's clear if we're not interested. And worst of all, in Agile teams, when we're asking for feedback and then we don't act on that feedback, that can be defeating the purpose of Agile as well. So there's no secret to many of you, thank you. There's no secret to many of you that I am also a mindfulness instructor. I started learning mindfulness back in 1999, where I started learning mindfulness by consulting the Vedas. Yes, I started learning guitar and all of these things. That's where I started. It led me on a journey, and I finally landed in a temple where I learned to meditate. And over the years, we know that these kinds of, particularly Eastern tradition, mostly non-secular activities have involved meditation, but in the last maybe 10 years particularly, meditation and mindfulness has become the mainstream. It's not just about connecting it to religion or faith anymore. So for me, when I think about what are the keys to stakeholder engagement, when I started investigating in this manner of looking at what makes good stakeholder engagement, the more I reflected on my own mindfulness practice, I realized that was one of the most important tools I could bring in to the engagement process. Now, it's only about how I am mindful. I can't make somebody else mindful. So when we say mindfulness, it's a funny word that we use today, because we often say things like, we must be mindful of the time, we must be mindful of the day, we must be mindful of that requirement, we must be mindful of Sajid's issues. We say the word mindful in many different sentences in our day-to-day language. But if you look at the word mindful and how we're using it, we must be mindful of the time, we're really saying we must be careful and aware of the time. We mustn't forget it. So mindfulness is really just that kind of aspect. When you look in the dictionaries and various texts about what does mindfulness mean, you'll find many different definitions. And over the last 5 years, I've been studying mindfulness in many different ways, from a psychological point of view to a religious point of view to everything else in between point of view. And there's so many different definitions that I can't figure out which one's right, so I gave up. I don't think there's one right definition, but I do think that there are multiple aspects to mindfulness. So when we think about aspects, we're sort of talking about different components of mindfulness. So once again, when we say we're mindful of the time, we're saying we're remaining aware. So when we're thinking about awareness, Awareness is that ability to have something in the front of mind so it's not forgotten. Sounds really simple and sounds really obvious. Of course we have awareness. We have awareness of what we're doing. We have awareness of what's going on. But I challenge you to think, have you ever been on a bus or driving and you're in the journey, and then when you arrive in your destination and you think back and you think, how did I get here? Did I have an accident? What did I see? Did I see the post office? Did I pass that shop? Did I see that store? So often we're not aware of what is actually in front of us. Our minds are busy thinking, lost in thought, and we're on this kind of what we call autopilot mode. We're still breathing and living and functioning, but we're barely aware of what's going on around us. And in fact, when you get there, you don't even know what you were thinking about, but you know what? The whole journey you were thinking and lost and away with the fairies, as they call it. You can't remember what you were thinking about, and you're barely aware of what's around you. So when we think about mindfulness and awareness, it's about we're keeping in the front of our mind and holding to some sort of kind of attention what's actually in front of us. Now, if you think back to stakeholder engagement, if we don't have awareness, we don't know what's happening for them. We won't be aware of maybe they're giving us cues as to they're not engaged or they're dissatisfied or whatever it is. We need to make sure that we continuously apply awareness to see what is actually happening right here, right now in our workshops, in our Zoom sessions, in our meetings, whatever it might be. But awareness in a mindfulness sense is not just about being aware of the outside world. That's the easy part. But also mindfulness is about being aware of our internal world. What am I thinking? What am I paying attention to? Where is my mind? What am I feeling? What am I hearing? What am I seeing? So we not only pay attention with awareness to the external world, we're fully aware of what's happening in our own heads. You know that little voice? You know that little voice that's sitting here on our shoulder telling us, you should do this. Oh, I can't believe you did that. We can also bring awareness into what that little inner voice is telling us, because most of the time it's very mischievous and is not helping us. If we can be aware of it, we can, dare I say it, make it be quiet and not believe it, because that inner voice can talk us in or out of some terrible situations. So mindfulness, at the primary heart of mindfulness, is the concept of awareness and not being lost in autopilot or lost with the fairies, barely aware of what's happening internal or external. Mindfulness also has this concept of noticing and being aware of what's happening outside there, but without reaction. When we think of a reaction, I can always think of a doctor with, that little hammer, and they tap on your elbow or tap on your knee, and you're automatically, you without even thinking, you kind of react without even voluntarily thinking that you need to actively react. So when we're noticing something, we're noticing without jumping in and saying something or acting funny or putting a scowl on our face or, all the things we do. I'm sure all of us can think of a time when we've talked to a partner or a friend when they've said something to us, and before we even know it, we've said something or we've put a funny expression on and we've reacted and blurted out something that can be so damaging. So when we're thinking of mindfulness, firstly, we're aware and we can notice what we're seeing and hearing with our stakeholders, with what they're saying, with what they're thinking, with how they're looking. And instead of us going, jumping in and trying to react to what they're saying and doing, we can hold off and just notice it and comprehend it and analyze it to some extent before we open our mouth and try to speak. It's almost, you might have heard that saying, count to 10 before you say something. But it's before, more than just counting to 10, it's really noticing and bringing awareness in, saying what's happening for them and what's happening for me. And then once I have noticed, I can then respond carefully, mindfully, with consideration in a wiser, more beneficial way than just blurting out something, just reacting without even thinking. So it's that concept of kind of slowing down to be fully aware and comprehend, and then going forward. There's a wonderful saying we say here in Australia, the mouth was engaged before the brain was. We start engaging our mouth before our brain has a chance to comprehend. So mindfulness is that bringing awareness into what's going on and then responding with that careful consideration. Mindfulness also has the aspect of deliberate attention. When we think of attention, it's a resource. What you pay attention to is an internal resource each and every one of us have. Are you paying attention to me, or are you paying attention to your emails, or perhaps to your family and friends around you? Maybe the traffic, something's happened outside the window. It's okay. Our attention is one of those fickle things. Sometimes our attention wanders. But mindfulness is basically saying, attention, I want you to stay here. So when we think about mindfulness and attention, it's three factors of attention. Knowing where our attention is now, knowing where it needs to be, i.e. what I should be paying attention to, and then thirdly, keeping our attention on the thing that we're meant to be paying attention to, whether it's our client, our stakeholder, or our work, not picking up the phone and checking our text. We're focusing our attention, so it enables us to focus. If we're working with our stakeholders and we're not paying attention to them, they very quickly figure out that we're not present for them. They very quickly realize that while they're talking, we're not paying attention because either we're distracted by our devices or looking away. But worst of all, attention can also be about, are we paying attention to our internal thoughts or not? Because sometimes if we're lost in thought and thinking about what we're going to say next, or maybe what's going to happen tomorrow, or what happened yesterday, if we're paying attention too much into our internal dialogue and our internal thoughts, we're no longer paying attention to our stakeholders. If we're not paying attention to our stakeholders, doesn't matter how good our stakeholder engagement plan is, we're not going to engage them because they'll just go, they don't pay attention to me, and they'll actively disengage because they won't feel heard. It's a skill, Ruben, fantastic comment there. It takes skill and perseverance to build your attention muscle. We're going to talk about that in a moment. The other aspect of mindfulness for me is an openness. Now, we talked about openness and transparency. That means I haven't got expectations of what I'm expecting them to say or not to say. If I'm working with a stakeholder, I am open to who they are, what they think, and how they say it, without saying they shouldn't say this or blah, 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 because when we're not open, we're setting expectations and boxing people in to a mold that we're expecting from them. However, being open and present is saying, I'm meeting them where they are, as they are, without those expectations. And I'm going to come and be ready to participate and be present with whatever happens in the moment without setting those limitations and expectations of who they are, what they say, and what we're expecting them to respond to us with. Ultimately, for me, when I think of my practice over the last 20 years, Mindfulness for me is a carefulness of my internal thoughts, my internal perceptions, and a carefulness of how I use these resources of attention to make sure that they are beneficial not just to me, but also to my stakeholders, especially in Agile teams. You are never working for yourself in an Agile team, unless, of course, you're a product owner. But when we are working in an Agile team and we're delivering something, we're not delivering it for us, we're delivering it for the customers and users who are going to benefit. So a carefulness of how we're going to use our minds, our thoughts, our reactions, and our attention, because they are the greatest resources you actually have. So mindfulness, how do we do it? Well, there's two types of mindfulness, formal and informal. Informal is any moment of any day you can choose to come back to the present, take a breath, clear your mind, realize what your mind is doing, kind of check in with your mind and saying, what am I thinking? What am I seeing? What's going on? Bring that awareness back into what's around me, what's happening internally, what's happening around me, and being present. So at any time you can be present. Even if you're walking down the street, you can become present to the sights and smells of what's happening all around you, rather than being lost in your own mind and own thought that you're barely even aware. So at any time, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for free, you can stop, come to the present, realize what's around it, bring that awareness in, and refocus from that point of, now I've got awareness, now what's next? What am I going to choose to pay attention to? What should I be paying attention to? And we go forward with that renewed focus and new invigorization type of thing. Of course, a few thoughts have been put in there about trying to not fade away and to be mindful all the time. Humans' mind is a wonderful thing. I've been trying to study it now for a while, and it's a fascinating structure because you can force your attention on one object, but after a while, our mind's very cheeky, very like we call it the monkey mind. Very quickly, it's saying, I'm bored with this. Give me something else to think about. Give me something else to do now. So our mind will drift. It is human nature. But with practice, we can learn to tame our mind, dare I say it, train our mind to stay focused and present and aware for longer periods of time. And that comes from formal practice. And that formal practice is meditation. So meditation is like going to the gym. When we go to the gym and we lift weights, we're trying to build up our biceps, right? We're trying to get bigger, stronger muscles. Well, meditation is a similar thing for our mind. When we go and sit formally in meditation, we help improve our ability to remain attentive, to remain aware. So when we are walking in our day, working with our stakeholders, doing our day-to-day business, we have a greater capacity to remain aware, to remain open and present, to watch what our attention is doing, and to notice without reaction. So the more we practice, the bigger our muscle is, our mind muscle. So the more mindful we can be in our day-to-day activities and interactions with our stakeholders. Does anybody meditate now? I know in many of the Eastern faiths there is we do pujas, which I myself do pujas. When we think of a puja, there is a meditative component of doing puja. Depending on your temple, you'll probably do meditation with your gurus and stuff like this. Anybody here already practicing meditation? Yeah, doing puja should be a meditation. That's how I view puja, because you're reciting your mantras and you're reciting all the various incarnations, and it should be a focus because you're you're asking your mind to stay onto one subject. So it's a very firm, puja is again, many of us I know do puja. I do too. So yoga, absolutely. So when we talk about formal meditation, again, I've studied Veda, but I also studied the Dharma. So for me, Dharma teaches us there is 84,000 84,000 different ways to meditate. 84,000. I'm not going to go through all of them. Might be here till next month if I did. I don't know all 84,000. I certainly know maybe 800. No, I probably don't even know 800. I certainly know many, many different ways to meditate. But when we talk about meditation, all it is choosing right this minute to spend some time internally to get my mind focused on an object, one object, any object, doesn't matter what the object is. It can be a flower, it can be a religious statue, or it can be your breath. The breath is a really easy one because the breath is always with us, and the breath is, of course, secular. We don't have to worry about which faith we are. Of course, my background, I do different meditations on different deities and different religious symbols, but we're not going to go into that. The breath is always with us, and we just choose one object, whether it's as I said, whether it's a flower or a crystal, it doesn't matter what it is. We choose an object, and in meditation, even if it's a mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, doesn't matter what the mantra is, or the object is, we're basically going to formally say, okay, mind, internally to ourselves, mind, stay your attention and focus on that object and stay with it. Don't let your mind wander. Try not to let other thoughts and distractions come in and interrupt your attention. So when we're meditating, we choose that object and we basically typically close our eyes. We focus, in this case, I'm going to say we focus on the breath, clear our minds, and we try not to let our mind wander. The trick with meditation is when our mind does wander, and I guarantee you it will, and it is perfectly normal that your mind wanders, that you are aware. My mind has wandered. I was meant to concentrate on the candle, but now my mind is thinking about that meeting I had with Siobhan last week. Our mind has wandered. We need to bring it back. Bring it back. Counting mala beads, exactly, another classic, especially for mantra. That's what I do a lot. I haven't got mine with me in this room. I've got them in my puja room next door. So when we think about meditation, we're basically saying, okay, let's stick with this. And if our mind is distracted, we bring it back and we bring it back. But the problem with meditation is not that our mind wanders, but being aware if our mind wanders. Because when our mind wanders, our mind will wander, and then next thing you know, we have more thoughts and more thoughts and more thoughts. And next thing you know, if 10 minutes have passed and we haven't been focusing on the object that we set out to focus on. So meditation needs, that's where our awareness comes in. Our mind wandering is normal, but it's a question of being aware that our mind has wandered. So it's kind of like when we think about meditation, there's the meditator and then there's someone who's watching the meditation, our kind of external thoughts, watching itself to be aware of what the thoughts are. I'm just noticing we're rapidly running out of time because I'm talking too much, which is terrible. So we will move on and talk about the benefits. There's a lot of benefits to mindfulness and meditation. I wanted to just say one thing, and we're going to move on into that Stakeholder Engagement Canvas, which I guess many of you want to learn a little bit about in this last half an hour. But I wanted to say one thing about meditation and mindfulness. There are many benefits. There are not just five, there are over 5,000 peer-reviewed, scientifically researched papers on the benefits of mindfulness. The body of knowledge is growing. It doesn't take much to Google some of these research papers. They've been done by universities such as Yale and the University of California, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many out there. Whilst I've put some up on the board, many of these, there's different studies to show the benefits in relation to some of the benefits up on the PowerPoint slide there. Doesn't matter. The only thing that you should worry about when we're talking about the benefits of mindfulness is if you try it yourself and you notice that you're yourself feel happier, more at ease, more calm, and dare I say it, more present, open and aware with your stakeholders. Doesn't matter what the science says. It doesn't matter what the research papers at the university say. If you notice the benefits, that's the main thing, right? So let's look at this stakeholder engagement canvas. Now, this canvas came about, as I mentioned, firstly because I was researching stakeholder engagement, talking about I'm an Agile coach, and a big thing I see as an Agile coach is the lack of engagement. That's what got me thinking, what can we do, what can we do, what can we do? I looked at tools, I looked at techniques, and I thought about it, and I thought, well, those tools and techniques are all well and good, but there needs to be more. I was talking with a friend of mine, the guy called Adrian Reed. Some of you might be aware of him. He's a reasonably famous kind of guy. He's a BA. And we were talking together about stakeholder engagement and how it seems to be such a challenge for many teams and many people. And at the time, we just happened to have a lean canvas. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of the lean canvas or even the business model canvas. Common tools, they've been around now for quite a few years. And I was looking at the lean canvas, and we were talking with Adrian about stakeholder engagement. I said, there really should be a canvas for this. And then he goes, yeah. And it got me thinking. So I started looking at the lean canvas, and I threw away the headings. And I said, if this was about stakeholder engagement, what would it be? And that's how it all came about. But it didn't just come about because I was looking at the lean canvas. I also thought about how my own mindfulness practice was something that I felt gave me a lot of benefit in my dealings and working with people. And I thought, well, between my mindfulness practice and some of these tools and techniques and a further deeper analysis that I could look within myself and be more aware externally of my stakeholder and the environment, how can I marry these tools to create a way and a structured thought process of how I'm going to go about my stakeholder engagement. And that's where this canvas has come from. So it's set up like a lean canvas. Excuse me, I do apologise, with 9 sections. So let's have a look at these 9 sections. So it's a template. You'll be able to grab the template. I'm not sure if you already can grab the template from the talk, but I'll make sure that there is a availability there for you. So the 9 sections, let's look at them one by one. The first section is them. Who is this stakeholder? Who are they? What's their role? What's their background? Culturally, family, who are they in the world? As a person, not just some business person, what's their attitude to work? Who's around them? What's their world like? For me, that's the important one. What's happening in their world? So we all are different people. We have different people around us. So we try to understand and meet them at where they are. We meet them where they are in the world. Now, I just wanted to also bear in mind when we're doing this stakeholder canvas, these questions are questions we need to ask perhaps them or other people to understand them. Some of these questions are going to be for you to answer and look within yourself for, and some of the questions are going to be for you to talk to your stakeholder. So when we talk about this first part of the canvas, it's quite a big section of the canvas because we might go and spend some time chatting to our stakeholder, asking them about what's important to them, what's their favourite team, did they play cricket when they were in school, whatever it might be. We understand who they are as a person and what's around them and in their world. So that brings out rapport and relationships. Nextly, that's a good English word. Next, we think about their needs. So what is this person wanting in this piece of work that we're doing together? What are their requirements? And is there alternatives? Issues, what do they value? What gives them pleasure? What frustrates them? What do they need from me during this engagement in this piece of work we're doing together. It's all very well that we think about user stories and stakeholder requirements, but we need to go a little bit further and say, what do they need from me? If my role is a Scrum Master, what do they need from me? If my role is a tester, what do they need from me? If I'm a coach, what do they need from me? If I'm a project manager, what do they need from me? So it's really about looking beyond their requirements, and we're not doing a detailed story map here. We're just going to say, what do they really need in this piece of work? So we're keeping it kind of without it being the specific user stories. Next is their goals and objectives. So when we think about goals and objectives, we're saying, how would they measure value? What do they want to achieve short and long term? And what do they need from this project? That's the what's in it for me aspect, what their priorities. How do they understand what's going to be valuable to them? What's in it for them? And what would happen if we don't meet their goals and objectives? Every stakeholder has slightly different goals and objectives, so we need to be able to be careful that, Amit has different priorities than Peter. So we need to understand what their priorities might be and what would happen if we don't deliver on them. What would be the consequences? Next, we think of the context. Stakeholder engagement happens in an environment. It doesn't happen just by happenstance. So we have to understand the nature of the work that we're going to be doing together. What's this project? What's this initiative? Most importantly, what's their expertise? What are they bringing into this piece of work? What are they bringing into the project? Are they the finance director and they know about finance? Or are they legal? Are they in the call center? What's their area of expertise and what sort of information or input are they going to provide to us? So when we think about decision-making and power, we might understand whether they can sign off on the budget or they're just someone who's just a bystander. We need to think about is there previous history as well. So we start thinking about the context of the work we're doing together in regards to this stakeholder and their background in relation to that piece of work. Activities. So this one's kind of a standard one, I almost say. What interactions are we going to have? So this, when we think about stakeholder engagement and stakeholder engagement planning, we start thinking of what meetings and sessions and calls and emails we're going to have, how frequently, how formally, what discussions, who else might be involved, and the last one, which is so frequently missed, how much time are we expecting from this stakeholder? Apparently we're all busy, including our stakeholders. So we might need to reassess to say, I'm expecting them to spend an hour a day with me, but are they going to spend an hour a day with me? So we might need to rethink about how much time are we expecting versus how much time do they have. We might need to rein in some of these expectations, our activities. Now, the next one sounds a bit like I'm repeating myself, but it's actually quite different. Earlier, I talked about goals and objectives, about what's valuable to the stakeholder. When we're talking about the outcome in this particular segment of the canvas, we're talking about what is the outcome of the engagement between me and this stakeholder. What are they expecting from me? What results? Are they expecting daily emails? Are they expecting stories? Are they expecting process maps? Are they expecting documents? What are they expecting from me? Outputs, artifacts. How formal do they need it? Do they need just a chat one-on-one, or do they need it in a formal document? Do we need to put it in Jira? How do we keep them up to date? And the last one there, which you also mentioned earlier, is how do we maintain transparency? How are we going to make sure that we're staying open with them? And what can we or cannot we share? Because sometimes things are sensitive. This is a section where the mindfulness really kicks in. We look inside ourselves and we ask ourselves, what preconceived ideas or notions do I have? Maybe I'm talking with Peter and I worked with Peter 6 months ago on a different project. Maybe at that time, me and Peter used to share lots of jokes. So I'm going to have this idea when I work with Peter again now that he's going to be very jokey, but we don't know that. So we need to look inside ourselves and say, what kind of perceptions do I have? What history do I have? And what opinions do I have, whether they're true or false? Remember, most of the time, your opinions are your own projections. They may or may not be accurate whatsoever. The last two are very important there. What is my attitude? Do I think Peter's going to be a piece of cake and fun to work with, or do I think Peter's going to be a pain and I'm going to dread talking to him? What's my attitude? And what thoughts do I have about them? Now, this one can be a little bit sensitive to be careful how you're going to share this information. The reason for this canvas is for your own ability to bring that mindfulness and that awareness into how you're thinking. Because if we're not even aware of these perceptions we have about our stakeholder, we can't possibly address them. So this seventh section of the canvas is for us to really look internally, mindfully, perhaps even meditate on what am I thinking and feeling about this stakeholder, because that's baggage. I'm bringing into this new stakeholder engagement this baggage of the past. Or maybe I've been told by somebody else, maybe I've been told by Ganesh, hey, careful with Peter, because, you know, when you're working with Peter, he's got a terrible temper. So straight away, I've got this idea that Peter's going to be terrible. I don't know that, but suddenly I'm bringing that in and I've got this false expectation of what I think this person's going to be like. So when I think about this mindfulness component of my canvas, this is it. Because if we can bring this to awareness, if we can bring this to the surface so we're aware of what we're thinking about this stakeholder, we can try to neutralize them and remove them and come to the stakeholder engagement without bringing all that baggage into it. Because last week, we might have worked with them, their lives could have changed. Perhaps they lost a loved one. Maybe they've been made redundant. Maybe they've been restructured. Maybe they're under stress today. Last told me they weren't under stress. So people are not the same. We're not the same person we were yesterday or the day before. Think about it. Where were you 2 years ago? Who were you 2 years ago to who you are today? We're all different. We change every day. It's being human, right? So this is bringing the human element in. Once we look at these previous 7 components, this 8th component can start thinking about risk. But the risk to our successful engagement with this stakeholder. What could go wrong based on all the other information, who they are, their priorities, their context, their activities, my perceptions. What could go wrong here? What could conflict, what misunderstanding could happen? So we really do a little bit of analysis on the previous sections to identify where the issues could arise. Could there be communication issues? Maybe I'm a native English speaker. Well, actually, English is my second language too, by the way. But maybe because we've got slightly different accents and we speak in different manners, because culturally in Australia we speak like this, but in America they speak a different way. We might need to think about, could there be communication issues, which is a number one cause of most conflict, actually. So we think about what could infect this engagement, because if we can understand what the potential problems are, we've got a chance right now to address them before they occur. So when we synthesize the risks, our perceptions, who they are, we can then start thinking about what am I going to do to engage with this stakeholder successfully. Now, those previous traditional tools of the RACI matrix, the power interest matrix, and all of those, you might use those tools to do some amount of analysis and capture that information along with this to understand how I'm going to engage with them, with what tools and techniques, how am I going to communicate. What's the best communication method that I'm going to employ? What approach? And how do I mitigate those engagement risks I've just realized in the previous section? What preparation do I need to do to ensure for successful engagement? And of course, how am I going to remain mindful? How am I going to remain aware and careful? When we think of mindful, awareness and carefulness of these risks and other components, how am I going to ensure that they stay front of mind and I don't miss these things? So when we put a stakeholder canvas together, it can be a simple tool we use typically by ourselves, and I always think of it being one-on-one, but I know that talking to my colleagues and in my teams, we've used it as a team to interpret as well. But it's just a brainstorming tool for yourself. And those questions that you can see all these questions I've put in, they're questions you're asking yourself to go and find the answers by talking to them or looking within yourself, so we can get a complete picture of how this engagement may or may not work and what the potential issues are. Now, I must admit, I've run this workshop as a half-day workshop, and for some silly reason, I thought we were going to have longer, but I know that our time is rapidly running out. I did have an exercise which I was going to get you to do, but I can see that there are so many of you, there's 75 of you. I don't think I'm going to have enough space and time to get this exercise run well. So I wanted to just do a quick summary of how mindfulness helps and enables us to have successful engagement by enabling us to focus clearly, to better communicate by understanding and responding to their needs, when we're facilitating our stakeholders to be unbiased and patient, to be empathetic, more open and transparent, most importantly, neutral. That neutrality is so important. We can be more creative and objective. And of course, there's also many benefits in terms of our own individual resilience and our relationships. So there is still quite a bit of time, and I think I'd rather spend that time taking your questions and comments. So feel free. I think it's going to be too hard if you use the microphone because there are 70 plus of you. So please feel free to enter any comments or questions into the chat. Myself and our moderator are going to keep an eye on those questions, and I'm more than happy to take as many as I can for the remaining 10-15 minutes that we've got of this session. I hope it's been informative. I'll make sure, if you haven't already got access to the engagement canvas, I'll make sure that's available. It should have been in your conference agenda, but if it isn't, I'll sort that out later. Thank you, the few people coming in and saying thank you. I really appreciate that. And don't hesitate to ask some questions. Here's a question. After so many years of practice, do you find it's much easier to? Yes, I do. Thank you, Chadan. I think, again, I've come from a position of 20 years doing mindfulness and 30 years in IT, more than 30 years. I started as a programmer back in 1988. I think when I look at engagement and Agile, particularly as an Agile coach or a Scrum Master, and I think about these things, I think what's enabled me the most. Is it my understanding of Scrum? No. Is it my understanding of story points? No. It's my ability to really create these relationships by listening, by presence, by focus, by attention. So I think for me, it's made a big difference to me. And people say to me, you know, I really felt you listen to me. I really felt you understand. And if I hear that from my stakeholder and they say to me, thank you, Kathy, I really felt you understand my concerns, my job is done. So for me, I think my mindfulness practice has really helped me, definitely. There are a few difficult stakeholders who would want you to fail. How do we handle them? Santosh, what an awful thing to talk about, that we have stakeholders that are actively trying to let you fail and make you fall on your face. How do we handle them? Well, once again, if we come in and try to come in and see the human behind their opinions, behind what we think that they're thinking, Because often we think that someone's thinking something and we accuse them of thinking things that we think that they're thinking, but they're not actually thinking that at all. It's just our projections. So maybe I'd go in and with due respect say, hey, person, you seem a bit negative there. What's causing that? I'm really fascinated to understand why you're not supporting or why you think this is not a good idea. But when we ask these questions, we've got to ask it with sincerity and humbleness. But most of all, we need to be prepared to listen to the answer no matter how uncomfortable they are. Because if people can feel that their concerns are validated and real, well, we can address them. If they don't even tell us what their concerns are, there's no chance we can address them. People have these perceptions themselves, and if they feel that I'm not going to share, they can figure it out. Well, we can't address them. We can't fix something we don't know about. It's a bit like, hey, my computer's broken and I'm expecting the IT department to fix it even though they don't know it's broken. It's the same thing with negative attitudes. We might need to think about, have they got this attitude for me or is it the whole project? What's happening there? Curious and respectfully say, well, there's something happening there and I need to understand what that is. And it's okay. They are allowed to have their opinion, even if it doesn't agree with mine. Because wouldn't it be an amazing place to live in if everybody agreed on everything? It doesn't happen. Not in a family, not in our friends. So it's not going to happen in our workplace either. The world is full of different people with different priorities and opinions, and all of them are okay. What we need to do is build more understanding and appreciate each other's positions. And that's where the mindfulness comes in, so we can hear and listen without reacting and saying, you're wrong. Because we do that all the time. We hear something, no, that's wrong. No, you are incorrect. No, I have a doubt. No. Stop and say, okay, I want to get curious and lean into this and find out more. So how do we handle them? By hearing them out and creating more understanding. Preeti said, do you think it will help to do this engagement for the team members? I think it'd be great. It'd be an interesting exercise to try to do it as a team. I've had this question before and I'm not sure how you could do it as a team to talk about it, but you could do it for you and individual team members. I think that's probably a great idea. And then each of us have an engagement canvas for each of the other stakeholders and team members. That could be an amazing way to do it. A lot of effort though, but it might be a really good thing to do at the beginning of a project when we're new to a team. Yeah, great question there, Preeti. Thank you. Yogesh asks how to engage stakeholders in a project or product in a ramp down situation, because most of the stakeholders are not fully engaged and putting pressure on the team. This one's a tough one and a very common one. Maybe they're under pressure themselves. So once again, if we can be mindful about what's under pressure, we might need to come to them and meet them where they are and say, well, what can we do? How can we engage you? But there are, beyond the engagement canvas, we might need to consider, well, what's the benefits for them here? How can we make them understand the benefits? How can we communicate more effectively and better fit in with them and their pressures and give them a bit of understanding? But there are, all of these tools of mindfulness and connection and rapport, there's a limit to how much we have to do. If we've got managers and deadlines that are beyond our control, we might need to escalate and say, hey, we've got stakeholders. There are times that you're going to have to escalate their engagement and say, hey, I can't get a time with Dipthi. Can you please help me make him understand that this is a priority? So it can be very hard. But no one else can be mindful. We can't make our stakeholders be mindful, but we can come and meet them and try to understand the world through their eyes. And through that understanding, we can try to figure out better ways of meeting in the middle somewhere. And there's no one size fits all. I wish it was. Chadan says, change starts from our side, then I think it'll be easier to understand others. Absolutely. Because, you know, the funny thing I've noticed over all the years that I've been working with Agile teams is when I exhibit being mindful, calm, aware, thoughtful, present, other people, without me even having to say anything, they start going, oh, I should be more like that too. And there's this weird kind of contagious effect, not COVID, oh, how horrible. But you will find that your attitude, depending, especially if you're a Scrum Master, for example, your attitude is going to infect the rest of the team. So if you come across more mindful and present, the rest of the team probably will too. Fantastic. Change from our side, and it sets an example and a precedence for the rest of our teams and our stakeholders as well. Remote learning, knowing the team members. Oh, remote, it's even harder. I think something like my engagement canvas is even more imperative when we're remote because we don't have that face-to-face anymore. So thank you very much. It's been awesome to be part of Agile India. This is the 3rd or 4th year. Unfortunately, I've been there, I think, in person twice and online twice. Hopefully next year I'll be back wherever Agile India is held, whatever city, you know, if I can be there, I'm going to be on that first plane over to see India. I have so many friends. I have Amit is my Delhi dad, and I have Priya, who's my Varanasi sister. So I have very close friends there, and I'm so looking forward to hopefully being back as part of Agile India in the future because I have my next little tool which is going to be launched, and hopefully I can present that and share that with you at the next Agile India. In the meantime, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. My name is Kathy Berkidge. There's only one of me in the world. My mum would say thank goodness for that. So find me on LinkedIn. I don't do any socials. I used to have Twitter, but I've closed it down. I have a website. It's a bit out of date. I apologise. But do keep in and link in with me. And if there is something specific I can help, whether it's running a workshop or a session with you and your teams, feel free to email me, kathy@mindatworkconsulting.com.au. Aussie. We're not going to talk about cricket because we've just won the T20. Let's not talk about that, right? Go Aussie. On that note, I brought it back to cricket again. I don't know how that happened. On that note, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I want to thank Priyanka for having me and being my host, and for all the Agile India team for once again holding this wonderful conference. Thank you all for being part of this session. I do appreciate your participation, and I do hope that one day we can meet in person soon.
Thank you, Kathy, for such an interesting and interactive session. I mean, I loved it, and I'm sure all the participants have the same opinion.
Thank you
so much.